Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Rain fell in thin curtains on the sleeping city. Street lamps cast a yellowish light that reflected off the wet cobblestones, creating shifting, eerie shadows. In an old, abandoned warehouse, 4 bodies lay motionless on the ground, their faces frozen in an expression of ultimate terror. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the dripping of water from the leaky roof. Agent Mark Stevens, a veteran police officer, entered, his boots clattering on the metal floor. He examined the bodies with a mixture of professionalism and disbelief. The wounds were not the result of a firearm, nor a conventional knife. Each murder had been executed with surgical precision, suggesting that whoever had carried it out had a thorough understanding of the human body. Stevens frowned. "How can a single human," he muttered to himself. Then he heard a small noise behind him, light, almost imperceptible, a muffled, high-pitched, childish laugh. He turned around and saw a little boy standing in the middle of the warehouse, soaked by the rain seeping in through the broken windows. His black eyes, huge and strangely sharp for a 3-year-old, stared at the bodies with icy curiosity. The boy's name was Ethan Carter. He was holding a small teddy bear in his hands, covered in dust and red stains. His mother, Rebecca, was behind him, her throat tight, frightened and unable to find the words. Stevens crouched down to the child's level. "Ethan, can you tell me what happened here?" he asked, his voice firm but gentle. Ethan slowly raised his hand, pointed at his bear, and said in a clear, almost solemn voice, "He told me to do it." Silence fell again. The policeman blinked in disbelief. "Who told you to?" But the boy didn't answer. He just hugged his toy, an almost imperceptible smile on his lips, as if he knew something the whole world didn't. The investigators present exchanged worried glances. Logic seemed shattered. How could a child kill 4 men so methodically? Was it a coincidence? A dark miracle? Or something more terrifying, something no one was yet ready to understand? Rebecca knelt beside her son, hugging him, tears rolling down her cheeks. "My little one, what have you done?" she whispered. Ethan didn't answer. His dark eyes, wide and unfathomable, stared at Agent Stevens as if to say, "You'll never understand." And in that oppressive silence, the mystery of Ethan Carter began. An enigma that would challenge the police, the city, and perhaps even the laws of nature itself. The rain had eased when Rebecca Carter entered their small house on the outskirts of town. The walls were covered with old family photos, mementos of better days, but the air was still thick with a dull tension. Ethan, her 3-year-old son, played calmly on the living room rug. His dark eyes stared at his toys with an almost disconcerting intensity, as if peering into the soul of each object. Rebecca, wiping her wet hands on a cloth, watched her son with concern mixed with admiration. Ethan was no ordinary child. From the moment he was born, he seemed to understand things no one else could. When he was 6 months old, he found an object in the house that had been lost for weeks, before anyone even knew it was missing. At 1 year old, he was correcting his mother's sentences with surprising grammatical precision. And now, at 3, he looked at the world as if he already knew how it would all end. "Ethan, do you want dinner?" Rebecca asked, her voice soft but firm. The boy looked up at her. He was silent, watching, weighing each word he was about to say. Then, in a calm, measured voice, almost disconcerting for his age, "Mom, they didn't come this morning." Rebecca frowned. "Who?" Ethan gestured vaguely outward, as if pointing to the entire city. "The bad guys. They're gone now." Rebecca felt a shiver run down her spine. Even though she didn't always understand what her son meant, she had learned to listen carefully. Ethan's words were never empty. She crouched down to his level. "Little one, you didn't do anything wrong, did you?" she asked softly, stroking his silky black hair. Ethan smiled slightly, but there was something cold in that smile, something beyond the naivete of a 3-year-old. "I helped them," he said simply. Rebecca felt her heart clench. She didn't know how to react. Help who, Ethan? But he didn't answer further. He returned to his toy, a spotted teddy bear that, at that moment, seemed almost alive in his small hands. Rebecca realized that this bear wasn't just a toy to him. It represented something she couldn't understand, a mysterious force that guided her son in directions no one could explain. That night, as Rebecca was falling asleep, she heard Ethan whisper in his sleep. They forgot, they don't know. I know. And in that simple, ominous sentence, Rebecca sensed that her son was both a blessing and a dangerous mystery, a child whose apparent innocence masked a power that the whole world would soon notice. Agent Mark Stevens had never encountered such a disturbing crime scene. The abandoned warehouse on the edge of town gave off a pungent smell of rusty metal and damp dust. The walls were covered in faded graffiti, shattered windows let in pale, flickering sunlight, and the ground was littered with debris. But what was most shocking were the 4 bodies, laid out with almost ritualistic precision. Each victim was a man in his 30s or 40s, all connected to local trafficking and violent crimes. Yet there was no sign that their demise would be so swift, so clear. There were no signs of a conventional struggle, no trace of an identifiable weapon. The injuries seemed almost calculated. Stevens felt a shudder of incomprehension. He crouched down to examine the first body. The marks on the skin, the angles of the wounds, the premature rigor mortis, everything indicated inhuman strength and precision. How could a single human do this? He muttered to himself. Behind him, his colleagues spoke in low voices, barely escaping murmurs of disbelief. We should call the FBI, one of them whispered. This isn't right. Then, a soft, almost imperceptible noise made everyone freeze. A high-pitched, childish chuckle echoed through the empty space. All eyes turned toward the warehouse entrance. There, standing there, soaked by the rain and covered in dust, was a 3-year-old boy. His black eyes gleamed in the filtered light, staring at the bodies with a terrifying, cold curiosity. Ethan Carter, Stevens whispered, recognizing the little boy who had been reported missing earlier that morning. He approached slowly, trying to make contact, but remaining wary. The child showed no fear, no remorse. He held his teddy bear tight against him, like a shield, or perhaps a weapon. Rebecca Carter arrived shortly after, panting and soaking wet, her eyes filled with panic and despair. Ethan, my son, she whispered, her hands shaking. She saw her child standing among the bodies and felt a cold terror wash over her. How could her little boy be at the center of this horrifying scene? Stevens crouched down to Ethan's level. Kid, can you tell me what happened here? He asked, trying to remain calm. Ethan slowly raised his hand and pointed at his bear. His voice was clear, firm, almost solemn for a 3-year-old. He told me to do it. The silence that followed was crushing. Stevens blinked in disbelief. Who or what could have told him to kill 4 men? Rebecca knelt beside him, clutching her son. Tears rolled down her cheeks. My little one, what have you done? She whispered, her voice breaking. Ethan didn't answer. His black, unfathomable eyes stared at Stevens with a blood-curdling intensity. In that gaze, there was a silent promise. What the world was about to discover about Ethan Carter was beyond comprehension. A cold, sterile, white room. The walls were bare, the polished concrete floor reflected the fluorescent lights, and the air smelled faintly of rubbing alcohol. Ethan Carter sat in a chair too big for him, his small hands resting on his knees. The teddy bear, stained with dust and blood, rested on his lap like an extension of himself. Agent Mark Stevens sat down opposite him, trying not to show his concern. He had interrogated dozens of suspects in his career, but never a child, let alone a 3-year-old with such a cold, penetrating gaze. Ethan, can you tell me what happened in the warehouse? Stevens asked, his voice firm but gentle. The child slowly raised his head, his dark eyes seeming to probe the officer's soul. He pointed at his teddy bear and said calmly. He told me to do it. Stevens blinked in disbelief. Who told you to? Ethan gestured vaguely, as if to point to something or someone no one could see. You don't see it, it's still there. Rebecca, standing behind her son, shuddered. She had heard snatches of those words before, in the house. Ethan sometimes spoke in hushed voices with someone only his imagination seemed to perceive. But today, everything seemed real and terrifying. Ethan, you did something very serious, you know? Stevens said, trying to stay calm, not to panic. The child tilted his head slightly. I didn't do anything, they had to leave, they scared me. His voice was surprisingly calm for someone who had just killed 4 men. Stevens felt a chill run down his spine. How could he be so calm? How could he justify such actions with logic that defied all understanding? Rebecca knelt beside him, taking him in her arms. My little one, no one wants to hurt you, but you have to understand, this isn't right. She whispered. Ethan looked at her intensely and said, almost as a warning. They had forgotten, they had to learn. Stevens wrote everything down in his notebook. The child didn't speak like a 3-year-old, he spoke like someone who had seen more than most adults and knew exactly what needed to be done. At that moment, Stevens understood one thing: Ethan Carter wasn't just a boy. He was a living enigma, a mystery that no one, not even law enforcement, was ready to face. And in the heavy silence of that room, the only certainty was that the world had just met a child who defied all laws of logic and morality. The news spread like wildfire in the small town of Harrington. Residents crowded around newspapers, stared at television screens, and whispered in cafes and on the sidewalks. 4 criminals killed, and the prime suspect? A 3-year-old boy. The name Ethan Carter was on everyone's lips, and the picture of a little boy with piercing black eyes haunted everyone's imagination. In the narrow, damp alleys, groups of neighbors debated in low voices. It's impossible, a child, said one. Do you think it's true? Asked another. They're talking about a teddy bear, and a kid who killed 4 men. Rebecca Carter, for her part, found herself cornered by suspicious stares and accusatory whispers. Once friendly neighbors now avoided her gaze. The police came regularly to check on the house, not to protect her son, but to keep an eye on him. Every gust of wind, every slamming door, startled Rebecca and reminded her that her life had just changed. Yet, despite the fear and chaos, Rebecca remained calm. She knew her son better than anyone. She knew that Ethan wasn't evil, but that he possessed a logic and strength the world didn't yet understand. She felt that protecting Ethan was now her sole mission. At preschool, rumors spread, too. Other children talked about the kid who killed, and even the teachers whispered in hushed tones. But Ethan, when he played with his blocks or his bear, remained strangely calm, as if he understood that the adult world was not up to his standards. In the press, the headlines oscillated between fascination and horror. The boy with black eyes, miracle or nightmare? Harrington in shock, 3-year-old kills 4 criminals. Who is Ethan Carter really? Stevens, the case officer, stood back, watching the media onslaught. He understood that every word, every photo, every report would fuel a mixture of fear and admiration for the boy. But he also wondered if the public was ready to accept the truth, that a child so young could act with such deadly precision and logic. Rebecca, holding her son close to her every evening, whispered, I will protect you, my little one, no matter what. Ethan would then rest his head against her and whisper in a low voice, almost as if to reassure himself. They don't understand, they will never understand. And in the silence of their small house, the media and social storm continued to rumble outside, unaware that the real mystery was not what the world saw, but what Ethan knew and what he would still accomplish. Agent Mark Stevens spent the night putting the pieces of the puzzle together. In his office cluttered with files, photos, and police reports, he analyzed every detail of the case. The 4 murdered criminals were not innocent, all had a rich criminal past, linked to a network of violence and trafficking in the region. But what struck Stevens was the precision and logic behind their deaths. Every wound seemed calculated to incapacitate the victim quickly, without any possibility of error. He reread the medical examiner's report, strength and accuracy greater than what an adult could produce in a normal state. Stevens frowned. How could a 3-year-old do that? His research led him to delve into the past of Rebecca Carter, Ethan's mother. Few people knew her story. Once, she had been in conflict with the local criminal network. 4 of the dead men had participated in an episode that had destroyed part of her life, harassing her family and threatening her son. The shadow of the past seemed to come back to them in a terrifyingly real way. Stevens sensed a strange coincidence. Was it possible that Ethan had chosen his targets based on this past? Or, as the boys said, someone, or something, had guided him? Rebecca, for her part, was beginning to distrust what her son was showing. She had seen his dark eyes scrutinize adults with unsettling acuity, comprehending complex situations and acting with a logic no 3-year-old should possess. But she loved Ethan, and despite the fear and incomprehension, she was willing to do anything to protect him. While on the force, Stevens began discreetly contacting the FBI, not wanting to alarm the city before he had a clearer picture. He knew Ethan was no ordinary child, and he needed to understand the truth before drastic measures could be taken. Meanwhile, Ethan played in the garden, his teddy bear clutched to him. He watched his surroundings carefully, as if anticipating every movement, every reaction. He sometimes spoke in a low voice. They forget. I show them. Rebecca watched him from afar, her heart heavy. She understood that her son was not only exceptionally intelligent, but also possessed a logic of revenge, an implacable justice that the adult world had failed to impose. Stevens, upon discovering these connections, realized one thing: the city had never been ready to meet Ethan Carter. And now that his past and abilities were revealed, the future promised to be even more terrifying and mysterious. Ethan's little teddy bear seemed, at first glance, ordinary. But when it was examined by experts called in by the police, a strange and disturbing discovery was made. Inside the toy, beneath the plush and stuffing, was a complex mechanism, an assembly of small metal plates, springs, and tiny unknown electronic components. None of it corresponded to modern technology or a conventional toy. L'Agent Mark Stevens. He stared at the toy, frowning deeply. He felt a twinge of unease. Was this the thing that had given Ethan his deadly precision? Or was it simply a catalyst, an object that channeled something the child already possessed? Rebecca, seeing the toy for the first time since the exam, shuddered. Ethan, where did this toy come from? She asked, her voice betraying a concern she had never expressed before. Ethan raised his dark eyes to her, strangely calm, and answered. He's still here. He taught me. These words chilled Rebecca. She wasn't sure if he was talking about the bear or someone else. Was it an outside force? A hidden consciousness within the toy? Or something within Ethan himself? Stevens began to note every detail in his notebook. The child wasn't simply holding the toy, he seemed to be communicating with it, receiving instructions, anticipating movements, and analyzing the behavior of others. The toy acted as a link between Ethan and the rest of the world. A world he saw differently, with deadly logic and intelligence. Meanwhile, Ethan, in his room, was talking in a low voice with the bear. They don't understand, they have to learn. Rebecca, sitting in the shadow of the doorway, felt a fear she had never known. She loved her son, she wanted to protect him, but each day that passed confronted her with the evidence: Ethan was no ordinary child. And the toy was no ordinary toy. This discovery marked a turning point for both Stevens and Rebecca. The mystery was no longer just about the murders, there was now an object, a catalyst, that made Ethan both fascinating and terrifying. The burning question on everyone's lips was simple: who or what was behind this toy? And, in the silence of the Carter house, the child continued to whisper in a low voice, an almost imperceptible smile on his lips. They will see, they will all see. Night was falling on Harrington, and the Carter house was plunged into a soft darkness, broken only by the reflection of the moon on the windows. Ethan was sitting on his bed, the teddy bear clutched to him, his eyes wide and shining with a strange intensity. He spoke quietly, as if someone or something were responding to him. They forgot, they don't remember, they must learn. he whispered. Rebecca watched him from the doorway, her hands clenched. Fear mingled with admiration. She saw that her son saw the world differently. He perceived the flaws, the lies, the intentions of adults with an almost supernatural clarity. And he acted accordingly. "Ethan, who are you talking to?" she asked softly. The child didn't look away. "He's here, always here, he's teaching me." Rebecca felt a shiver. She didn't know who this he was. Was it a child's imagination? Or was it an outside force, an invisible guide who had given Ethan an extraordinary capacity for understanding and precision? As the days passed, Ethan began to recount details about the 4 murdered men, details no one could know without having witnessed them. He spoke of their actions, their thoughts, their weaknesses. Rebecca realized with icy terror that her son wasn't just an intelligent child, he seemed to read souls and anticipate the actions of others. L'Agent Stevens, observing these phenomena from a distance, began to note down his observations. "It's no longer just a child who acts," he murmured. "He has a logic, almost a strategic awareness." One night, Rebecca heard Ethan speak longer, more structured sentences, in a voice that seemed not entirely his own. "They think I know nothing, but I see everything, and I do what needs to be done." These words resonated in Rebecca's mind. She understood that her son possessed a worldview no one could dispute, an understanding of justice and revenge that transcended childhood. She was torn between love, fear, and fascination. Outside, the town remained in the dark about what was really going on inside that house. No one knew that, behind those modest walls, a 3-year-old child was developing a consciousness and intelligence that would overturn all notions of normality and morality. Ethan, lying against his bear, closed his eyes to sleep, but in his mind, the visions continued. He saw the criminals, the past mistakes, and knew exactly what had to happen. And in that eerie silence, one thing was clear: the dark-eyed boy would never be an ordinary child. The rumor had now spread through Harrington like an uncontrollable fire. Debate raged in the police stations. Some officers believed Ethan should be immediately placed in a safe house for his protection and that of the community. Others, including Mark Stevens, believed that the child was not a spontaneous danger but possessed an extraordinary logic and intelligence that had to be understood before acting. "You don't understand," Stevens insisted, showing his notes. "He's not doing this out of anger or malice. He's acting with precision, almost strategic. And it's no coincidence that the 4 men were targeted." His colleagues shook their heads in disbelief. But Stevens knew that every detail mattered. Ethan wasn't just a smart kid, he saw the world differently, anticipated others' intentions, and chose his actions with a logic few adults could match. Meanwhile, back at the Carters' house, Rebecca felt the pressure intensify. Every ring of the doorbell, every step down the street, every glance from the neighbors put her on alert. She knew that the slightest mistake could turn Ethan into an experimental subject, or worse, a criminal in the eyes of the law. Ethan, for his part, remained strangely calm. He played with his teddy bear and observed the house with meticulous attention. Sometimes he would get up, approach a window, and whisper, "They don't know. I have to show them." Rebecca watched him, torn between admiration and concern. She saw that her son possessed an inner strength and determination that went beyond childhood. She knew that protecting Ethan was now a mission that would test their entire lives. Stevens, who regularly returned home to observe Ethan and his interactions with Rebecca, noticed a disturbing detail: the child seemed to understand adults' intentions and emotions better than they did themselves. He analyzed every movement, every word, anticipated reactions, and acted accordingly. Tensions reached a peak when a state inspector announced that he wanted to place Ethan in a specialized center for at-risk children. Rebecca, trembling but determined, categorically refused. "My son is not dangerous, he is unique, and I will not leave him in your hands." Stevens watched, aware that Rebecca's choice had just defined Ethan's immediate future. He also understood that, whatever the authorities decided, the dark-eyed child would continue to defy all expectations, all norms, and that every action he took from now on would be scrutinized, analyzed, and feared. In the shadows of the house, Ethan whispered to his bear. They don't understand anything, but I'll show them. And in those words, the promise of a power and intelligence beyond human comprehension was felt, heralding even more troubling days for Harrington. The town of Harrington was in turmoil. The newspapers headlined, "A 3-year-old child defies logic and justice. Ethan Carter, miracle or threat?" In the warehouse where it all began, a group of police officers and federal agents had gathered. Mark Stevens was there, determined to understand Ethan and protect the boy from a situation that could quickly escalate. Rebecca, holding Ethan's hand, cautiously entered the warehouse. She knew her son wasn't of this world, but she also knew he wasn't maliciously dangerous. However, she felt this confrontation would be crucial to protecting the child and revealing the truth. Ethan stood in the center of the warehouse, clutching his bear. His dark eyes shone with an unnatural intensity. He wasn't trembling, showed no fear. He knew exactly what was about to happen. Stevens moves forward gently. "Ethan. I want to understand. I want to help you." The child stared at him, heavy silence filling the space. Then he made a slow, precise gesture with his hand, pointing toward the police officers and agents. "You don't understand, you think I'm dangerous, but it's them, the bad ones, who were." At that moment, the agents present stepped back in astonishment. Ethan began to describe with surgical clarity the past actions of the 4 criminals, revealing secrets even Stevens was unaware of. Every word the child spoke was precise and methodical, revealing an intelligence and insight no one could have anticipated. Then, there was a noise. Members of the local criminal network, hoping to take advantage of the confusion, entered the warehouse, armed and aggressive. Tensions rose instantly. Stevens felt his heart race. The confrontation was becoming real, dangerous. But Ethan, without blinking, looked at the intruders with icy calm. He gestured toward his bear and whispered, "It's time." The men, surprised by the child's strange aura and determination, hesitated. Ethan's every move seemed calculated, perfectly anticipating the criminal's every gesture and reaction. In a few moments, thanks to his intelligence and speed, he neutralized their weapons and brought them to the ground, without excessive violence but with inhuman precision. Rebecca and Stevens stood frozen, unable to look away. They had just witnessed the impossible, a 3-year-old child in complete control of the situation with logic and mastery. When calm returned, Stevens approached Ethan and whispered, "You are amazing, but you have to understand, not everyone will understand you." Ethan looked up, his deep gaze fixed on him. "They will understand, one day." Rebecca knelt beside her son, hugging him. She knew this confrontation wasn't just physical, it was revealing. Ethan wasn't just a child. He was a being apart, a living mystery, capable of changing the rules of the world around him. And in the silence of the warehouse, a clear message was heard by everyone present: Ethan Carter wasn't just a 3-year-old boy. He was an enigma no one could ignore, a force that would mark Harrington forever. The sun was rising over Harrington, casting a pale light on the still sleeping town. The Carter house was silent, but inside, an eerie calm reigned. Rebecca was preparing breakfast for Ethan, who was playing with his bear, staring into space as if he were seeing another world. Mark Stevens he entered, notebook in hand, knowing that this was a crucial moment. After weeks of investigation, observation, and confrontation, he was beginning to understand the truth behind Ethan and the mysterious bear. "Rebecca. Ethan. I think I finally understand," Stevens began, his voice measured but filled with deep respect. Ethan raised his dark eyes to him, attentive. "Do you understand?" he asked softly. Stevens nodded. "Your son isn't just smart. He has perception, almost supernatural. And that bear, it's not just a toy. It amplifies what your son feels and sees. It allows him to analyze, understand, and predict the intentions of others." Rebecca felt a chill. She'd always known Ethan was special, but the scientific and police confirmation gave way to a mixture of pride and fear. "But, why the 4 men?" she asked. Stevens hesitated for a moment, then explained, they were part of your family's past, Rebecca. They had hurt you. Ethan, your son, he acted to protect what you hold dear. He doesn't do this out of hatred, but out of justice, according to his own logic. Ethan hugged his bear and whispered. They forgot. I had to remind them. In the days that followed, the town began to understand that Ethan's story was not just a news story, but a unique phenomenon. The media spoke of a child prodigy capable of perceiving and reacting with incredible precision. The residents of Harrington oscillated between admiration and fear. Rebecca, for her part, decided to protect her son at all costs. She knew that the outside world still didn't understand Ethan's depth and uniqueness. But she also understood that her role was clear: to accompany, guide, and protect this exceptional child, whose destiny was linked to something greater than mere human understanding. One evening, when the house was silent, Ethan spoke in a low voice to his bear. They thought I couldn't, but now they see. I'm ready. Rebecca approached and whispered. Yes, my little one, the world will finally see, but you will always remain my son. Mark Stevens, observing from afar, noted in his notebook. Ethan Carter. A 3-year-old, but with extraordinary intelligence and insight. Harrington's living mystery. The world hasn't seen anything yet. And in the silence of the night, with the bear cuddled against him, Ethan finally slept, a mysterious smile on his lips, ready to face a world that, little by little, was beginning to understand that he was not a child like the others.